So in chapter 13, we were selling stock, stock. We were raising money by selling equity in our corporation. Chapter 14 are bonds, and that's debt. We're borrowing money. Because when you sell a bond, you're borrowing money. Okay? Now the reason you don't do that is because if you sell stock, you're acquiring owners. Owners have certain rights. Where if you borrow money, you don't lose that control. Okay? The other advantage, of course, is the fact that the interest that you pay on the bonds is interest expense, lowers your net income, lowers your taxes, right? In chapter 13, it was a stock. And what you did with the stock is you gave a dividend, but that dividend didn't lower your taxes. In fact, it got taxed twice, right? So if you borrow money, you have interest expense that is a legitimate expense, lowers your net income. If it was a stock, you would have had the dividend, and the dividend would not lower your taxes. Okay? The trouble with any bond, or with any debt, is when you borrow any money, you're required to pay back interest at certain intervals, and pay back the principal at the end. So you're obligated for these cash outlays, and sometimes business is inevitably going to have a downturn, and it makes it difficult to survive those downturns. So there's a definite risk involved in borrowing any kind of money. Okay? Now, let's take a look at this. So, all right. Now, when you issue bonds, so you have a bond issuance. So a bond issuance. Now, we talk about selling a bond, etc., but bond is debt. When you issue a bond, you are borrowing money. Bond issuance. When you issue a bond, when you sell a bond, you're borrowing money. Okay? And so you borrow money, and you're also obligating yourself, your company, your corporation, to pay interest, pay periodic interest, and pay the principal at the end. So you pay interest periodically, and then at the end you pay back, so you pay the interest periodically, and at the end you pay back the principal, right? So if you borrow $160,000 every 6 months, you'll pay $72,000 interest, and at the end of the term, say 10 years, you pay back the $160,000. Okay, so you pay back the interest periodically and pay back the principal at the end. Okay, so here's what it looks like. When you issue a bond, let's say it's 160. So in this case, what it is, it's the par value is $800,000. Okay, that's the amount you're borrowing. It's a 9% bond, and you're going to pay it back in 20 years. Okay. So when you borrow the money, let's say it's January 1st. This is when you make the borrowing. Cash is debited for the $800,000, and bonds payable, is credited for $800,000. Okay. So this is when you actually sell the bond. When you sell the bond, that's really, sell is kind of a misnomer. You're not selling the bond, you're borrowing money. The people who buy the bonds are lending you money. Okay? Then, what we have here is every 6 months, you're going to send them the money. So the way this works is interest equals principal times rate times time. So in this case, you borrowed $800,000, and it was a 9% loan, and you're going to pay them back every 6 months. So that'll be 180, 360. So what that means is every 6 months, you're gonna pay back you're gonna send $36,000 in interest, okay? So June 30th is 6 months later. You're going to debit bond interest expense. For the $36,000. And you're going to credit cash for the $36,000. You do this every 6 months for the life of the bond, okay? Then, 20 years later, you're going to pay back the principal. So, 20 years later, December 31st, and this is 20 years later, what you do is you pay back. So now bonds payable will be debited for $800,000, and cash will be credited for $800,000. Okay? And this $800,000, this bond's payable, is that bond payable. Okay? And so here's where you, every 6 months, you send the interest of $36,000, and if it's 20 years, there'll be 40 payments, because there's 2 per year, right? And then at the end of the 20 years, you pay off the principal. And that's what this looks like. Okay? Now, by the way, what we could have done here is this is equal to 1/2, right? So this is 0.5. What I could have done is I could have had 800,000 times 4.5%, and that would equal the 36,000. So what I could have done is, rather than multiply this times half and then this times that, I could have just made one multiplication here and multiplied the 800,000 times 4.5%. Does everybody see that? And it would have given me the same number. Okay? All right.
Interest on that is nearly twice the principal over 20 years.
Yeah, isn't it amazing?
$1.4 million.
Yeah.
Is that like a typical rate for bonds?
It depends on period in history. Because at one point in time, 10% was not a bad rate. It could have been higher.
In the 80s.
Yeah, well, I was thinking more, yeah, it would have been the 80s. Yeah, 10% would have been, now, of course, we're talking about a much smaller number. So, the numbers in here are 9 and 10%, but, okay. All right, is everybody doing good? Yeah,
So every 6 months they're paying the $36,000?
exactly.
That's more, and they pay more in their interest than they do in their
Yep, they do, exactly. Yeah, so I'll be right with you, Addie. So every 6 months, now, by the way, because it's a 20-year bond, right? And 6 months is 2 per year, they'll make a total of, they'll make a total of 40 payments of $36,000. And then they'll pay off the principal at the end. Yeah, Addie?
So I understand you correctly. Bonds, you're asking for monies for somebody, they're gonna give you this money, and you're gonna pay them interest. You don't have to pay on your principal. And the principal, you pay at the end, in one lump sum.
To kind of follow up on that, now, if you do a car loan, that's different, right? A car loan works differently. Every payment you make in a car loan or a house, part of your payment goes toward principal and part goes to interest. And that'll also come up in this chapter, incidentally. And that's not what we're talking about here. And just to kind of follow up on, in reality, what we're talking about, these are the conventions of financing with a bond. In effect, these are just the conventions. And the conventions of a bond are different than the conventions of a house or a car. And I think that's more to the point of what you're kind of asking. So, yeah.
What's the average time that a bond is, like a principal on a bond is due? Like this one's 20 years, is it usually?
10, 20 along in there. You can get them shorter, you can get them longer. And to kind of answer your question, what businesses often do is they'll sell a whole series of bonds. And so when they issue the bonds, some of them will be due in 5 years, some due in 10, some due in 15, and some due in 20. And the reason they do that is because the huge principal payment doesn't come in any one year. Rather, it's spread out over a number of years. And from an investor, I'll be ready, from an investor's point of view, like right now, because interest rates are so low, if you're going to invest in bonds, it's important to invest in short-term bonds because you don't want to be stuck with a low interest rate for a real long period of time. I mean, it's just kind of looking at it from the opposite point of view. Do you have it?
In this scenario, you just automatically or pulled out of the air the 6-month repayment for the interest.
Well, what it is I think the answer to your question is, it's a contract. And the name of the contract for a bond is called an indenture. And this contract says, this indenture, the contract, what it says is, we're going to pay back, the indenture just spells out all the details. The indenture would say, it's a 9%, 20-year bond.
Yeah, I was just making sure, so like, we're on a test, that's gonna be a given.
It's
not
gotta be a
something-
given.
It's not inferred that, hey, on a bond,
There are commonalities, like often they're sold at $1,000 denominations, but there's exceptions, of course, but.
are we gonna get into the bond issuance, how they're evaluated and all of that?
Yeah, in fact, I'll do that right now, because, yeah.
So what if the company decided like after 10 years they wanted to just pay off all the principal? Is it like within the indenture that they have to pay it off in 20 years?
Well, yeah, what it is here's the deal. Often, just like a stock, they'll come with a call price. And so if they have a call price included, they can do a couple things. Number one, if they have a call price, there's also a call premium. So when they buy it back, often they'll pay more than the carrying value, okay? So if it comes with a call option, then the issuer, at their discretion, can buy it back. The other thing they can do is go to the market, and if there's bonds being sold in the open market, they can buy their own bonds just on the market. Yeah.
What happens if a company fails before the bond is due?
Well, again, bankruptcy, that does happen, sure. Like Enron, a whole bunch of people have worthless pieces of paper.
Yeah, I know that, I had to work for them.
Or did you work for it? Do you have any good war stories?
Oh, my husband did, he worked for them, he saw people shredding papers the day before the company.
Man.
And he said, man, Zoots, he was working for a construction company, he said, man, Zoots came onto the site, shredding papers in very large numbers and burning them
Wow.
the day before they heard that it was really up.
I was just gonna ask, so from an investor standpoint, no matter what, are you gonna make money on bonds? Because you're gonna always get the principal back and you're gonna get all that interest.
They're much safer. They're much safer. But again, with any investment, there's a risk, but they're safer. And the other thing is, don't forget, you're a payable. So if the business does go belly up, they sell the assets, pay off the creditors, which are bondholders, and the rest goes to the stockholders because they're equity holders. So you have a higher position in the food chain. The trouble is, by then, they may not have anything left. Yeah.
This may be a stupid question, but who gives bonds?
What's that?
Who gives out bonds?
Well, here's the deal. By the way, I've never seen where one person has a question. Somebody else is saying thank you. I don't know who. Okay. Here's the deal. The company says, listen, here's the deal. If you go to a bank, that's one person. The name for that is a note. If you borrow from 1,000 people, that's a bond.
Oh,
And it's just a way to borrow from 1,000 people, or whatever, a big number.
It comes
So,
from the bank.
yeah, so they're generally in $1,000 denominations, and 1,000 people can buy a bond each. So 1,000 people lend you money, lend your company money
In one bond.
in one bond issue. So what you did is you issued bonds, people bought the bonds, and buying and selling, those are misnomers. When people bought the bonds, what they did is they lent you the money. And in this particular instance, you're then going to send $36,000 to all the bond holders. And so if there were 100 bonds, 100 of this would go to each bond holder.
Oh, I see.
Okay?
Okay. In the corporation.
No, the deal is they're individuals. You could buy a bond.
Public.
And if you bought a bond in, let's not use Enron, but if you bought a bond in, like General Motors, right? Then you buy a bond, you lend money to General Motors. General Motors would then send you, every 6 months, they'd send you whatever interest you were due in that bond, and at the end of the term, they'd pay off the principal. But you would buy a bond from General Motors, you'd be the effect of that would be to lend money to General Motors. General Motors would then pay you principal, the interest every 6 months, and at the end of the term, they would then give you your $1,000 back.
Okay.
And so you'd be the creditor for General Motors, the lender. Yeah.
Are savings bonds the flip side of it? Is that where
That's just the
people
government.
buy a savings? Okay, so it's different.
Well, it's just a way
So
the
like if
government.
somebody wanted to get in on the bond action, right? So how would they do that?
Well, you go to a broker and you can buy bonds through them, and you can also buy bond funds. And the advantage of
Okay.
that is you have diversity.
Okay, so if you want to be like somebody who lets your money be used by somebody who buys a bond, so you can get an investment return on that?
So, and you can buy into a bond mutual fund, and
Okay.
that's just a whole bunch of, that means this bond buys a whole bunch of bonds from companies. That way you get the diversity in there. So if one goes belly up like Enron, you have 99 others that
Okay,
don't. And that's one way of doing it.
all right,
Yeah. And of course, the savings bond is you lend money to the U.S. government.
okay.
Yeah.
With Enron, they went bankrupt, so did they not have to pay back any of their bonds?
There's just no money to be given back.
So like if you had a bond with Enron, you basically just don't get anything
You
back.
can sue them.
Or you get pennies in the dollar. Yeah, because a friend of ours had to put in, their part of their retirement account was involved
Oh.
in,
Yeah, we lost a lot.
yeah, yeah.
My husband would drive like 200 miles to buy a bank to cash his paycheck.
Wow, yeah, yeah. But again, it's like anything that goes belly up out of bankruptcy. So you guys, let's do this. Now, what do we got? I think that should be enough time. Let's do this. Let's do problem 4-5A. And I made this because I think this is just the best way of explaining this, okay? So here is, can I give you those? Here's the working papers. Oh, that's wrong. Let me see what I did there. I want 4-5. Oh, I see. There we go. Here it is. All right. Oh, here's my, I'll keep them on. Here's the one I want. Sure. And all this is just the working papers. Now, I'm not counting these, so if your row is short, if you look in front or behind you, there you are. And let's go through this, and I think this will be the easiest way to understand what's happening here. Michael, can I do that? I'll keep one, Junior, here you are. Diana, when you get down, could you pass it back to Antonio and Jacob?
I hope so.
A or B? Let's do B.
Darn it.
And if you guys want to leave those in the end, I'll just pick them up when I'm after class. I think we make this use our time with doing that. So let's go ahead and work through this. And I think this is the best way of explaining something like this is just to practice it. And okay, so what it will do now is we have, so it's we'll do 14-5B, and that's in page 589. So here's how it works. What happens with this is, so what happens here, and I'll just go ahead and I'll put this over here, okay? So what happens here is, in this case, what we're going to do is they issue $160,000 bond issue. So what they do is it's 14-5B, so it's down here. So what it does is it uses this data up here. So what they want you to do is compute the total. So here we go. What it is the Zova company issues a 9% 5-year bond dated January 1st with $160,000 par value. The bonds pay interest June 30th and December 30th and are issued at a price of $166,494. Their annual market rate is 8%. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So it's a 9% bond, okay? And they're borrowing $160,000 at 9%. So what we're going to do on this thing is, what we have here now is we have the semi-annual interest payment. So here's the first one on January 1st, 2011. 6 months later is June 30th, 2011. 6 months later is 12/31/2011, and so forth. And it's a 5-year bond. And so there'll be 10 interest payments because they're every 6 months. And it's at 9%. So what we're going to do here is, let's start with calculating the interest payment. So in this case, what we have is interest equals principal times rate times time, right? So in this case, what we'll have, actually, I'll put this up here. That'll be the best way of doing that. So what we'll do here is we'll have a $160,000 loan. Okay. So interest equals principal times rate times time.
Are we doing part 1 or part 2?
Well, let me take, actually, could you, let me walk you through it. And so, and let me just take a look at this. So, I'm not sure what your question is.
There's, in number
There's
14.5B, there's 4 parts to it.
Okay.
Because you're looking at part 2
Oh,
right
I
now.
see. We're probably going to do part 2 of 14-5.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? And what, yeah, okay, good. So listen, so in this case, it's $160,000 times 9% times 180/360. That comes to 7,200. So what it means is every 6 months, they're going to send 7,200 of interest to the bondholders. Okay, so they're going to do that on, so actually I kind of jumped up this one, and this is blank there actually. So they're going to sell, after 6 months, which would be June 30th, they're going to spend 72. 6 months later, which would be December 31st, they're going to send an interest payment. They're going to send an interest payment 6 months after that, an interest payment 6 months after that, an interest payment 6 months after that, an interest payment 6 months after that. So every 6 months, they're going to send an interest payment. Okay? And then the last one was on December 31st, 2015. And Mariah, I hope I give you the right number there, but I'm just, what I'm going to do here, okay, it may not be too exactly, but see if, and be sure to yell if this is somehow isn't clear. I bet it will be. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so what they're going to do is every 6 months, they're going to send out the semi-annual interest payment, and that's 7,200 because it's principal times rate times time. Now, by the way, we could also shorten this because this is half. So what we could do is 160,000 times 4.5% will also give me the 7,200, and it'll just save a step in there because this is 0.5. So if I make the initial, make this calculation here, does that make sense?
Yeah.
So is 4. So is everybody okay on that? Now, and then on December 31st, at the very end, December 31st, 2015, I'm also going to pay $160,000. And where that came about was the bond indenture. And it said, so what you did is, when you decided to issue a bond, the rate at that time was 9%. You agreed to make these payments based on 9%. And so you're going to make these you're gonna make these interest payments every 6 months, pay back the principal at the end, right? Now, what happened here is that when you can actually send the bond, the interest, instead of being 9%, it changed, and fortunately, it changed to your favor. It changed from 9% down to 8%. So it was 8% on the date of the issue. It changes, frequently, every day. Yesterday is one thing, today is another thing. So now, it's 8%. Well, it means that you're gonna pay less interest is what it means, right? So now, you've agreed to make these payments. That's in the indenture. But you're not going to pay 9%, you're gonna pay 8%. Okay? So, having agreed to pay $7,200 on June 30th, 2011, $7,200 December 31st, 2011, and so forth, and this was all based on 9%, but you only have to pay 8%. How are you going to do that? Well, let's do this. You guys remember the present value tables? So what we have here is so what we're going to do is, here's the present value table that's in your appendix, okay? And table B3 is right here, and table B3 is the present value of an annuity, okay? So in this case, it's a 4%, and the reason I'm doing 4% is because it's every 6 months, right? And there's a total of, is it 20? No, it's let me take a look.
10.
5, so it's 10, okay? So what it is, now, does everybody see, who doesn't see where I'm getting the 4%?
Oh, this is half.
It's because it's half of 8. So just like back here, I could have 4.5% because it was half of 9. Okay, here I'm going to use 4% because it's half of 8. So here's what I'll do, is I will get, in this case, it's 7,200 times 8.1109. So the present value of all of those future payments at 8% compounded semi-annually is $58,398.88. Okay, and that's at 8%. And then I'm going to table 1. And in table 1, that's the present value of a single amount. So now I'm going for 10 periods, again at 4%. Okay. So in this case, so now that 160,000 I'm going to pay back at the end of 10 years. The factor is 0.6756. So the present value of that is 108,096.00. Add those two together, it comes to 166,494. Okay? So, and I'll just shave off the cents. So what happens on this thing is, I'm agreeing to pay back. I'm agreeing to make all of these payments. And that was based on 9%. When I made the sale, it changed to 8%. So if my bond holders pay me a total of $166,494, when I pay back the $7,200 plus the $160 at the end, they'll get an 8% return on their money. Does that make sense? No.
That number was already given to us in the book.
And it was given, I just want to show you how they got it. Yeah, you're right, and it was given to us in the book. But what I'm doing here is I'm just showing you where it came from. And this is not just, and where it came from was my planning and my commitment was based on 9%. But when I made the actual sale, it's based on 8%. And so if I sell it for this, then, okay, so what it means is the difference between this 160,000, which is the face value, okay, and the 166.94, that means 6,949. So here's the actual amount that is based on. Here's how much I'm actually going to be paid. So I'm going to pay back 160,000 at the end. They give me 166,494. The difference is 6,494. That is called an unamortized, at the beginning, it's an unamortized bond premium. And it means that this is how much I'm going to save in interest expense over the life of the bond. Because they're going to pay me this amount, I'm going to pay back a smaller amount, but the difference is this was based on 8%, this was based on 9%. Does that make sense? Okay. Yeah.
That's because of the market value.
Yeah, and it's because the market value, you can't predict it. You gotta base, you gotta plan your books, you gotta float a bond. And when you came up with the idea, it was 9%. When you made the actual sale, it was 8%. And so this is how you make, these are the conventions of making that adjustment.
Typically would go the other way though.
Well, the deal is it can go the other way, and then it can go either way.
Oh,
And this is what it's like when it goes down. Okay, if it goes up, then you sell it with called a discount. And the math is very similar, it just comes up, it just really goes in the opposite direction. But the math is very similar, okay? So this is what it looks like when the interest rates go down. When they go down, you sell it at a premium, okay? Now, we're also going to use what's called the effective interest rate. So the 8%, so in this case, what we have here is so in this case, what we'll do is we'll get 166,494. We're going to multiply that times 4%. And the reason we chose 4% is that it's half of 8. And so that comes to 6,660. So here's the payment we're going to make. The actual interest we're going to incur will be 6,660. So here's the interest based on 8%. Here's the interest based on 9%. That creates a difference of $540. That $540 is part of the premium we're amortizing. Then if we have 6,494 minus the 540, that means there'll be $5,954 of the premium left. And the carrying value will now be the premium plus the principal. So the carrying value of this will be $165,954. So here's the carrying value. So this carrying value, now here's the amount you borrowed. If the deal fell through, this is the amount you return. Okay? 6 months later, you send out this payment, and if the deal fell through at this point, this is how much you'd have to return. So here's the carrying value. Okay? Is this starting to make sense? Now, let me do one more row. Yeah, Diana?
How come, we didn't round up to $399 on the 58,000?
On the what now?
The 58,398.88, how come we didn't round it up to 399?
Far right screen,
Far right
top
screen.
number.
It was actually supposed to be 20.
Yeah, and all I did is I just tried to make it coincide with the book.
Oh,
No, your point's well taken. The rounding up, I just kind of ignored it because the book did give these numbers and I wanted to coincide with the book. Man, I'm so glad you asked that, because the reason I presented the calculations is because I want to show you how it works. And unfortunately, I've got to ignore the rounding out part of those calculations for it to work.
So we don't round up when we do
Well,
round?
do round up, but we're not going to do it here. We'll call this an exception.
It would be 9.5 instead of 9.4.
Yeah, it would be, yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, and Diana, I apologize for, because, you know, I presented it, because it seems to me the best thing I could do is show you how the math works. And unfortunately, they both gave me some numbers that I've got to incorporate here, and the book didn't round up as they usually do.
Well, it's actually supposed to be 0.48. Yeah, so that's why they didn't round up.
Oh, it was 0.48.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see, it was 0.48, you're right. There you go, Diana, it was 0.48. Yeah, Justin?
What would cause a deal to fall through, like on a 6-30-2011, and you have to pay the 165? What would cause that deal?
Well, actually, I just meant that as an example. The value of it at the very beginning is this value. 6 months later, this is the value. And what makes it fall through, that was just kind of an illustration. They don't fall through.
Okay.
Yeah, they don't fall through. But I just meant, because it's always easy to see these things in your mind's eye.
We're gonna go over this again next week, right?
Yes, we will. All right, okay. You guys, let me do the next row. Now, 6 months later, what happens in this is we're going to send these guys $7,200 cash, that's true. The actual interest we have will be $165,954 times 4%. That turns out to be $6,638. So that's the interest the interest expense I'm going to incur, because the interest expense is based on the effective rate. That's the carrying value. When I subtract 6,638 from 7,200, I get 562. When I subtract this minus 562, I have 5,392 to amortize. When I add this to the 160,000, the carrying value will now be 165,392. Okay?
Wouldn't, we should subtract the 5 from the 165?
Yeah.
Yeah, how are you getting such a
Oh.
low number?
I'm sorry, subtract.
The 5,392 from the 165,954? Subtract column D from column E?
What you want to do is, now here's the I hope I'm doing this right. So what happens on this thing is, here was the unamortized, so here's the unamortized premium, right?
Oh, C from E, sorry.
No, appreciate your question.
I was subtracting D from E instead of C from E.
Okay, always ask, because when I'm on your side of the table and somebody does a jive, I can't go any further until I get it. So always ask. Does that make sense? Yeah, so here was the unamortized premium. Here's how much was amortized in this period. Here's what's left. And then okay, what may make this clear is let's go up to, let's just take this last one. Here's what it would look like on the balance sheet. So on the balance sheet, or I'll put it here so it shows up in the camera. Okay, so on the balance sheet, this is what it looks like. So here you have the balance sheet. You have the liability section. You'll have bonds payable. And the bonds payable will be $160,000 plus the premium. In this case, it'll be 5,392. Add those together, it comes to 165,392, and that's the carrying value. And that's the real value of the bond at that point in time. And this is what it would look like on the balance sheet in the liability section. You have bonds payable, 160,000 is the bond, is actually what you own the bond. You have a premium, and that's the carrying value. Yeah.
I actually did the math in my calculator. You take 6,494 minus 562, right?
No, you take 5,954 5.54. You
Oh,
subtract 5, you just subtract this from that to get
okay.
that. Yeah, this minus that equals that. Angelica, you hit your head there?
Yeah, I'm just, I'm sorry. What I was trying to figure out is it, no, it's not right. Okay, you answered it right now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Let me go back a step, is see if this is helpful. Your original agreement to send this amount of semi-annual interest payment plus this at the end was based on the indenture, and your planning was based on 9.5%, and you made this agreement. And just seeing if this is making it clear. Then when it came time to actually make the sale, your luck held, interest rate went down to 8%, okay? And so you saved some interest expense. Because you'd agreed to make these payments, then the conventions surrounding bonds say you sold it at a premium. Then when you sell it for $166,494, right? And you pay these people $7,200 every 6 months plus this at the end, that will give them an 8% return. Or it'll cost you 8%,
But not 9.
but not 9.
How? When we calculated the numbers off of 9.
And these are the conventions around issuing a bond. Conventionally, and the reason that these conventions came about is because often there's 6 months between when you decide to issue the bond and when you actually make the sale. And they can easily be quite different quite different percentage rates.
Okay.
Yeah, Jean?
So for this one, why are we paying, like, so for all bonds, do we pay for the last 6 months, like when we're gonna also pay back the principal, do we pay interest for that last 6 months as well?
Yeah. On December 31st, 2015, which is the end of the last 6 month period, you make an interest payment and you make a principal payment.
Okay, so because the one we did on the board, we didn't specify that, but should we just have no, kind of?
Yeah, all they did is I just showed you one interest payment
Okay.
and no more.
I was just wondering.
Yeah, but exactly, so at the very end, on the very last day, you make the last interest payment and you make the principal payment.
Okay.
And again, these are just the conventions around issuing a bond, is all they really are. And it'll be done differently if it's a house or a car. Okay. All right, you guys doing good? Why don't you guys do the next row? Okay. All right, so here's what you want to do. You want to multiply 4% times the carrying value. Okay, that will give you the interest expense. Oh, what you do is you just put a number in there and make a job.
Just to make it tough.
Yeah, in fact, I'll put it right here. So here's that's a really good question. So by the way, let's do one thing at a time here. So here's the row we just dealt with, okay? Let me answer 2 questions. So there's the row. And here's the answer to your question. So down here, what the deal is, see here's the number you're talking about?
Yeah.
Adjusted for rounding. Yeah.
How do you calculate column C. Sorry.
The difference between these two.
Oh, 72.
Okay.
It's the 4% multiplied by the
Yeah.
previous
Yeah.
carrying value.
So, but column C is right here, right? So, and here's what happened on this. Here's the cash you sent. Here's so the way this works is the actual interest expense, so this is bond interest expense. It's the market rate times the carrying value. So the market rate is 4%, half of 8, right? The carrying value, so this is the end of the year, at the beginning, it becomes, so this is the market rate at the beginning of the year. So that gives you the interest expense. So here's the money you sent, here's the interest expense. The difference is 584, that comes out of the amortization of the unamortized bond premium.
Steve?
Yeah.
So on 12/31/2015, is the bond interest expense, that's always going to be treated as a plug figure then? Because it can never go below the 160,000?
Yeah, and the way it boils down to is when you're dealing with 6-digit numbers, and no matter how big your calculator is, it only goes out so many places, and there's going to be some rounding off. And when you have a succession of multiplications like you do here, it's not going to be exact, even though it should be.
Yeah, because if you do it, then you come up with $8
Yeah,
balance in your unamortized premium.
exactly.
So is the rule that you cannot go below 160,000? That's why you have to do
Exactly.
it?
And where it came from is this number right here, because you want an amount that'll bring it down to there. You'll have none left, so this 777 will bring it down to none. And then this is where the adjustment shows up,
And the adjustment's always gonna be something small, right?
something small.
It's not gonna be anything.
And it's because, it's a small amount on each one, and it keeps accumulating. In this case, it was a 3-digit number over 5 years, over 10 calculations. Yeah.
What's the point of doing all this if you're actually paying the same amount as you would have?
Okay, because the amount of, so what the deal is we've only got a couple minutes left, so let me show you here. So what we're going to do here now,
If you're actually paying 7,200 every year,
Right.
twice every year in interest, and at the end, you pay the original principal amount.
well, here's the interest, because what happens is, so let's do the first one. So on the first one, what we have here is here's the interest expense that shows up on your income statement.
Because that's what the actual interest is.
That's what the interest, exactly.
But not what it is.
Right, here's the interest expense you're incurring, here's the cash you're paying, and the reason the interest expense is less is because the interest expense is based on 8%, the cash is based on 9%, and the difference comes out of the premium.
Would it be easier just to not do that?
It would make it easier not to do that.
Well, I mean, it doesn't seem to make any actual difference, you're still paying the same amount.
Okay, now, everything you say is true, but your income statement will be inaccurate. Your income statement means this is the amount of expense you incurred. This is not the expense, this is the cash.
You signed a contract for more than you should have. Basically, saying you're paying 9% with the market rate of 8%.
Yeah.
So you made a bad decision, and it's not really a bad decision, but.
I wouldn't say a bad decision, I would say when you decided to float the bond, the going rate was 9%. When you actually made the sale, it was different. In this case, it went down to 8%. Therefore, because you contracted this, and as far as it goes, and again, all we're doing here, these are the conventions around selling a bond. And this is the way it's done. And there's a rationale behind it, and there's a reason for it. Well, it's the timing between when you decided to sell the bond and when you actually sold the bond.
Yeah.
There were two different interest rates. So the board approved, I'll be right with you, Angelica.
Okay.
The board approved this cash outlay.